Hello and welcome. I am Scrapperlock. This is City of Heroes. We're with Liberty Lass, and he's just under 1,000,000 XP to get to the next level. I think we might get there this episode, but we'll see. That'll be our final power, and I have no idea what we're going to get. But we're on this story arc for Maria Jenkins, and we're doing the final chapter where we have to go and save Positron. This is actually a pretty tough mission, but we've got, the best inspiration setup we have, and so we're going to go ahead and do that. And while we do, guys, I want to talk today about the 44 rules for D&D. Google this, 44 D&D rules. You'll get a Reddit post. The original post was apparently taken down, but somebody archived it and reposted it on Reddit. And so apparently, let's sort of set the stage. Was posted by literally an angry DM, right? A DM who, somebody said this in the comments. If you read the text, this is a DM who's at the end of his rope, whose players have just driven him so bananas that he's making some really very harsh and pointed rules. And what we're going to do is talk about these rules, what it means, like are any of them valid, are none of them valid, are all of them valid, does he have any good points? But somebody said this is the writing of a DM whose players have broken him or her. I think it's a guy. I'm not going to keep saying him or her. So this is a broken person, somebody who's been so frustrated by their players that they can't take it anymore, and they're putting out these ridiculous rules. So we're not going to do all of them, but let's go through them. I'll try to bleep out the profanity. So rule 1, I'm timing turns. I don't give a bleep if it's unfair in your opinion. Because your spells are hard or you don't know what square to move to, you get 1 minute to know all the actions you want to take, or I skip your turn. Yeah, I don't agree with that one. I think that there can be a lot of fun and enjoyment in figuring out the tactics of a situation. My players and I like to do that. And, if he doesn't, that's fine. But just saying arbitrarily, I'm going to time you, and if you don't do if you can't figure out what you want to do in a minute, I'm skipping your turn. I don't know that that's going to lead to constructive gameplay. I think it's going to lead to people rushing, and that's going to make the encounters artificially harder because the players don't have a chance to think. He's running 5th edition, I think. That's an incredibly complicated rule set. This isn't like Savage Worlds where a power is 1 paragraph and all the powers work pretty much the same. Like all the damage powers do 2d6, base damage 3d6 on a raise, so you don't have to look that up. And you can, almost keep, it's not index card RPG, but you can also almost keep your character on an index card in Savage Worlds, and an index card RPG you can in a lot of other games like Basic Set you practically could, other than maybe your inventory, or your spells, but with all the rest of the character could be kept on an index card. D&D 5th edition is not like that. It's, I've had the experience of trying to plan ahead of time what I want to do so that I can go quickly, and something that happens before me in the round ends up invalidating all of the plans I had and making me have to, the thing that happened just before I went completely changes the entire context of what's going on in the mission, and I have to reevaluate. And all of a sudden, the spell that I was reading up on while other people were going and was all ready to use cannot be used in this situation. None of the spells I'm familiar with can be, but there's a new spell I just took last level that could be. And now I've got to look it up, even though I've read it before, because it's 3 pages long and it's complicated. Right, 3 paragraphs long, and it's complicated. And, nothing, they never word anything simply in 5th edition D&D. They always make it as confusing and complicated as possible. It's terrible writing. And I say that objectively. I mean, if you read the way the rules are written in a game like Savage Worlds or in a game like Champions, the older Champions and newer Champions isn't this way. And one of the reasons I don't like 5th and 6th, at least 5th edition, is because it's so complicated in the way it's written. But if you go read 2nd edition Champions, everything is very, very clear and concise, and almost any particular rule is a short paragraph. And all the rules work in a very consistent way. So once you understand how one thing works, you understand how everything works. 5th edition's not like that. It's very complicated, and I don't think it's fair to only give people 1 minute. Now, I could see giving them 3 minutes or 5 minutes or something like that, but 1 minute, that's ridiculous. And, you know, just this, I don't care if it's unfair. I don't care if it's hard or you don't know what to do. Just too bad, I'm going to skip you if you don't go. I don't really like that. His second point, if you want harder fights, bring a second character sheet and expect to twiddle your thumbs when you die. I don't baby anyone. Now, this is a really weird one because what he says he opens it by saying, if you want harder fights. Then he says, bring a second character, be prepared to die. So this almost sounds like a GM whose players have been complaining that the fights aren't hard enough, that things are too easy, and that you're, you know, like, I would like it to be tougher. It's sort of like my best friend said to me, like, one of the reasons I said I don't like high-level D&D is that there doesn't seem to be any real risk of dying, character death, or anything. And he said, well, I don't feel like we've had any risk of character death in Savage Worlds either. I'm like, challenge accepted. Actually, I didn't hardly do anything. I just ran the thing as written. The next session, 2 characters died, and his character was incapacitated and had to make the equivalent, Savage Worlds equivalent of death saves, or the vigor check to see if you die. And he had to re-roll with a Benny, I think, in order not to die. So we almost lost 3 characters. Now, it just so happened that he said that right before a really tough fight, but that made me go, okay, well, I have no incentive to make this easier because he just said it's not hard. Okay, well, if that's what you think, let's see what happens when we play the adventure as written and I don't ease up on you. I hadn't really been easing up on them. It was just luck that, you know, they got lucky in a couple of situations. And there were some very big battles in Blood Drive that I cut down because I didn't want to run a big giant battle like that, and it was taking too long. But yeah, it sounds like this is one of these, you know, the players are complaining, their characters are high level, things are too easy. And what this actual second point, there's something legitimate underneath it, right? It's obviously stated in a rude way. And again, I think whoever said in the comments of the Reddit that this is a broken man who's, you know, his players have broken him and that's why he's acting this way. If you want harder fights, bring a second character. What does that mean? What it means is, if you want the fight to be harder, this is what happened in my Savage Worlds game, right? 2 characters died. That's a really hard fight. Well, they had to make up new characters. And what this means is that as a game master, and Luke Hart talks about this, and we mentioned it in one of my playthroughs, if you make a fight hard enough to be really challenging and suspenseful, you might kill the characters, because the only way not to do that is to ensure that the enemies are doing only a tiny amount of damage. One of my friends at work, my colleague at work, said if you want to make a D&D fight exciting, you can do it at any level. What you have to do is figure out, like, what's the average hit points of the player characters, and then the main attack of the bad guy should do half of that, right? Which means it's going to do more than half to the wizard and a little less than half to the fighter. But if everybody's sitting around with, you know, between 80 and 120 hit points and the average 100, the typical attack of the bad guy should do 50 damage, right? Whether you're rolling, you know, 10d8 or whether you just say it does 55 damage, that would be enough to put the fear of God in them. But if you hit a character twice from that bad guy, that character's dead. Or is going to in death saves, right? And they might fail their death saves. If you're playing to the dice and you're actually playing the game, you know, fairly and correctly, and I think we're getting toward the end here. We're going to taunt these guys out if I can see them. If you want an exciting battle, that means there's a chance of death, which means characters could die, right? So it seems like what this GM is saying here is, yeah, okay, if you want harder fights, you need to understand that this could mean that characters will die. And if your characters could die, you better have a backup character, right? If you don't have a backup character, then you're going to have to wait until the next session in order to play. And so if your character dies early on, like, you know, you play from 8 to 11, your character dies at 9:30, then you're either going to have to go home, sit there, do nothing, or you'd better have a backup character, right? Or you play one of the NPCs or something for the night. You know, I've done that. Stop using AoEs over here when I'm trying to pull. I wish you could issue orders to these guys. Can you? No. Positron's like over there. So I think we can... Well, I don't want to go in the lava, so I'll float over it. Come on. And we'll back up. If Manticore gets himself killed, that's going to be his problem. I'll taunt for him and stuff, but I'm not going to run into the battle with Positron until I'm ready. So anyway, I think that, you know, to some degree, this is a valid point, right? If you're going to complain the battles are too easy and you want them to be harder and more exciting, then you should understand that by definition that means that character death is possible, and you should expect that characters may die, and you better have a backup character at least in mind, if not already rolled up. Right? Call of Cthulhu, they tell you to make up backup characters because it's a tough game, and it's, you know, they expect character death occasionally or insanity, and so so I sort of agree with this point. I don't agree with how it's worded, but I do agree with the point. If, as a player, you're going to say we want really hard fights, then by definition that means you want fights where characters could die, and you better be prepared for that consequence, including prepared with a backup character idea, right? I mean, I will say this: the new girl, one of the reasons she likes Savage Worlds better than D&D is she said, you know, there's a risk of death. She did not have a backup character concept. There's the Olympian Guard. Let's see if we can take the Shock Trooper out first. She didn't actually have a backup character made, even though she wanted the risk. She actually didn't like it that her character died, and she kind of had her heart set. She really liked this character, and when she made up the new character, she's kind of squirmed a little bit and complained it's a little bit uncomfortable. And now we're getting attacked, so time to buff up. I think we're ready to go here. Here we go. And I will take out this guy. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a well-considered point, even though it's badly worded, which is, as a player, if you're going to ask your GM to give you really tough fights, the definition of that means it's a fight in which characters can die. So you'd better be prepared. You better have a backup concept at least sketched out, right? You don't necessarily have to have the character completely made, everything written up, etc., but you'd better have a backup character idea in mind. Character class, character race, you know, whatever species, edges, whatever it is. If it's Savage Worlds, right? You know, what kind of a character are you interested in making up? Is it going to be a gunslinger? Is it, if it's Deadlands, is it going to be a huckster? Is it going to be a Wichita witch? Whatever. And we have successfully saved Positron. Hey, buddy. I really like the character Positron. He's cool. Out we go. So, wow, we did that whole mission. We only went through 2 of these. We won't be able to go through all 44. His third one. This is just ridiculous. If you call me or my rolls unfair, I'll get up and go home. And if you got to ride with me, you can find your own way back home and suck it up. Okay, that is ridiculous. D&D, Pathfinder, whatever, is a game. If you drove somebody to somebody's house, you're their ride home. You don't say, you can find your own way home. I mean, that's just really lousy. What kind of friend are you? And like, obviously these people aren't really friends anymore. Because if they were actual friends, he wouldn't be saying stuff like this, and they wouldn't be acting this way to each other, right? What this implies is that the players are calling his rolls unfair. There's a really easy way to solve this. Is just roll in front of the players, right? Nobody calls my rolls unfair. Now, I mean, I masked my rolls in D&D. I mostly rolled behind the screen for the majority of rolls. Like, I did that for 2-hit and damage rolls. I mostly did that so that I could protect them if I felt like I had done too much damage or whatever. But one thing I did was whenever the players used a save, or so I've mentioned this before, a save or suck spell on the NPCs or the monsters. Save or suck means if you don't save from it, your character just slowed and can't do anything, or they're paralyzed, or they get mind controlled, and that's going to basically end the fight, right? It's an I win button type spell. I always rolled that in the open. They knew what the DC is, and I rolled in the open on Foundry just so they could see it, because if I succeeded, I didn't want them to think that I was succeeding. I was just making it happen because I didn't think the monster should fail here. I mean, if I felt that way, I would just give the monster legendary resistances, right? And sometimes they did have legendary resistances. But I started that in like the 4th level encounter where my best friend really, really, really wanted to land hold person on a monster he shouldn't have been able to do it to, but neither of us realized that it wasn't a humanoid. And so he really wanted to land hold monster or hold person on this U1T, this evil U1T. And I knew it had 2 legendary resistances. And he knew it had legendary actions, so he said, well, it probably has legendary resistance, I'm going to do it anyway. And I said, okay, I knew he had a pretty high bonus to the roll. So I'm going to roll in the open, because I knew he had legendary resistances, so if I didn't want it to work, I could just stop it anyway. And so I rolled in the open so that he knew I wasn't just arbitrarily saying it didn't work. We trust our GMs, but we also recognize, and he definitely does, the GM's ability and power to just overrule the dice. And so it's possible that I could have overruled the dice here. We had started playing again only a few months before, and I'm going to just go ahead and roll in the open. But that means that obviously the rolls couldn't have been unfair if I'm rolling in the open. But this whole idea of if you call me unfair, I quit. I mean, I understand if you don't trust your GM and you don't think the GM is fair. Oh, we're fighting Malta. I got to watch out for sappers. If you don't, you shouldn't be playing with them, right? I've said this before. If you really believe that your GM is fudging rolls in a way that is unfair, right? Acknowledging that GMs have the right to fudge rolls, and trusting the GM to not do it in an unfair way is fine. But if you're going to say not only are you fudging rolls, but you're doing it unfairly, well, you shouldn't even be in the game with that GM. So I can sort of see him saying, well, if you're going to believe that about me, then I shouldn't be your GM, and you should just find a new GM. But I wouldn't just get up and leave and say whoever I drove here with, this doesn't even sound like somebody you're friends with, right? Because you might be annoyed at what I'm doing in D&D, but like the bad Rob, no matter how much he annoyed us in Champions, I didn't say my mom's not going to give you a ride home. Like once the Game Master screen was closed and we've cleaned up our character sheets, whatever conflict was going on amongst us during the session is over. We're still friends to go to, I can still give you a ride to school, right? And I can still give you a ride home from my mom. My mom can still give you a ride home to your house, right? And the fact that he is going to be that way about it, again, makes it seem like this person has been so traumatized by their own players that they're lashing out in this way. So I would say, look, if you think your GM is unfair, don't play with them. But that doesn't mean fudging. That means unfair. There's a difference. Number 4, I'm going to take your character's loot away as regularly as you want it given out. And Rule 3 applies. And if you call this unfair, I'm going to leave. Why are you taking loot away that you gave out? Right? If you don't want the player characters to have loot, don't give it to them. Right? There's no magic items so far in my Deadlands game. None. Now, I am planning, after they hit veteran level, I would like to do something Jordan Caves Callaman did in his Deadlands game on the Wildcards channel, which is to make up a cool magic item that I think each one of them might like. I was thinking of using Life Drinker, which is this cool pistol, for the Huckster, but because the Huckster is a hex slinger and has their own magic that they shoot out of the gun that's better than Life Drinker, I'm not sure. I got the stats for it from the Wildcards webpage. Not sure if I'm going to use it. I'm not sure anybody would really like it. So I'm gonna. We'll see. I'm gonna either. There's a bunch of magic items in the Deadlands Companion, and I might use some of those, but I might also tweak them or make up my own. Did I miss a glowy? Back on the other level. Hang on. I think I might have missed a glowy while I was talking. The one in the middle of the room. Did I pick that one up? Because I went past it so as not to aggro, and I can't remember if I grabbed it or not. So I'm going to go check. Sorry about that. So yeah, I would say, why are you taking the loot away from them? I don't mind doing it. This is the one I was talking about. I don't mind doing it a little bit. Steve Glicker talks about this really cool character, and I always wanted to PM and ask for stats, but he'd give me the stats for D&D, and I'm playing Savage Worlds. I would love to figure out how to do this, but it's this cool, I don't want to call it almost a pseudo monster, because it's not a single creature, called the Rook. And it's actually, what it looks like is a person in a trench coat with a hat, but it's actually a bunch of crows in a flock that are filling the trench coat and the hat, and it looks like a shadowed face. And it's a bunch of these little birds, and when they go, and there's like all these rumors about the Rook in the world, like children are afraid of it, and mothers will say the Rook could come and take your stuff. And what the thing actually does is, and I don't know if he made it up or if he got it from somewhere, the birds will fly out of the coat, swarm around you, take one of your items if they make a successful skill check, I guess, and then go back into the coat, and then they will and then they'll try to fly away. And he said players hate this because they do not like to have their stuff taken. Obviously, you wouldn't do it to them without some way of them getting it back, right? My feeling is if you don't want players to have a magic item, don't give it to them, right? The idea of purposely taking it away from them is, I don't understand that, right? So it sounds again like these players are very loot driven and they want to be, kind of as the one person expressed to me, I'm going to put my loot in my build and you have to give it to me. And he's like, and I guess his reaction is, well, I'll give it to you, but you should expect that it could get taken away. Again, I don't believe that anything external to the character, such as magic items, is part of your build. And fortunately, because magic items aren't really a thing in Deadlands, and the players don't really know anything about the ones that do exist, they don't call them magic items, they're called relics, in the Deadlands Companion, nobody's got one in their build. Right, their builds are all about edges and powers and trait rolls and stuff like that, which is exactly the way it should be. So that when I give them magic items, it's a fun bonus, it's a fun surprise, it's not part of their build. Now, my best friend might, want a certain one, but yeah, I mean, I know what he wants. He wants to get the Hoyle's Book of Games that have the extra spells in it. And I've got to deal with him every time he walks into a general store or something that sells generic items or potentially books. They didn't really have bookstores in the Wild West, but general stores sold them and stuff. He draws from the deck of cards, from his Huckster deck, and if he gets a Joker, he'll find one of those earlier editions. What he doesn't know is I can't remember exactly where I put it, but somewhere in the first act of the Horrid Headstone Hill, which is going to happen, in the next few sessions, I have a note to myself that if he hasn't found one yet, the previous addition to the one he has that has an extra one or two spells in it will be in this loot, right? It's in a reasonable place for it to be. I think it's the loot of a Huckster or a Harrowed Huckster or something like that. Yeah, it's reasonable they might have that item, but of course that character is going to have access to those spells too, right? Because they've already used that book. So yeah, I don't believe. But if I give him that book and he says I want to learn these spells, I shouldn't take the book away and say he can't learn the spells. What did I give it to him for? Like the GM completely controls the loot. You shouldn't be giving out loot you don't want your players to have. Number 5, if you don't act out any of your this one is ridiculous. If you don't act out your persuasion or intimidation or other social checks, you fail, even before you roll. You fail immediately because you aren't even trying, and you're making the game poor for everyone else. No, absolute no to this. Not everyone is an actor. And it is perfectly acceptable for someone who is a shy, quiet introvert, but playing a dramatic, dynamic character who's an extrovert, to say, look, I don't know what the right thing to say to the king is here, but my bard probably would. So can I have him say something cool and dramatic about how we just saved the king's son and it doesn't make sense to imprison us? And whatever the right words are, we assume my bard says them. I'd say, yeah, sure, roll. Right? I'll ask you what is the content of what you're saying, right? What is the gist of what you're saying? But I'm not going to make you act it out, right? I need to know what the content is to know how the NPC is going to react, right? So if you're trying to convince the king not to imprison you, you say, well, we saved his son, isn't that worth something? And that's kind of the gist of what my bard's. Okay, that's fine, right? I don't need you to act out the dialogue and mime it, and I think that's ridiculous. So you auto fail if you don't act it out. Now, again, as the one person said, this seems like Sapper, hang on, I made a mistake here. Hang on. Wow, yeah, I'm getting pounded. We gotta put strength of will on here because of the endurance drain. Yeah, that was sloppy. That's because I'm talking. I don't care about the gun. So, so we're talking about like making persuade rolls and stuff. So again, this is probably a GM whose players would just say, I'm going to walk into the shop and persuade the shop owner to give me a better deal. Right? And they're just doing it all the time. And players seem to want to do this, right? To use their skills as spells, right? They think that the persuade skill should work like a charm monster, right? And the intimidation spell should work like the fear spell or the suggestion spell, right? These aren't magic spells. Persuasion is not magical, and you have to have some indication of what your character is doing. But even if you're casting Hold Person, I would ask you, what does the spell look like? And you need to describe it a little bit. Does it need to be like J.R.R. Tolkien describing spells in Lord of the Rings? No. But you have to have some sort of description, at least in my game, right? Because it is a role-playing game and you're playing a role. What is that? Oh, we're getting attacked. Whoa, Sapper again. Where is he? Where is he? We should be safe because we have our level up buffs. So yeah, wow, we're only, through 4 or 5 of these already, and we've gone through a big chunk of content, but that's okay. We're going to keep going. Maybe we'll do this in parts, guys, and we'll talk about this. So yeah, that's ridiculous, and I don't make people act things out in order to make their check. I ask them, what are you doing, right? One of my players just said, oh, can we make, like, they were in this, they took over this manor house, the bandits left. They did a social challenge. It persuaded them to leave. It was really good role play in my play-by-post. And the players are, like, there's at this manor house, and it's got the main floor, a top floor, an outhouse, like a staff house where the butler and stuff stay. And then it's got, like, 2 levels underneath it. And the one player was like, can I make notice rolls to search the manor? And I was like, no. Where are you searching? It's a huge place. You need to tell me where you're looking, right? So she was like, okay, I'm going to walk up to the hole in the wall and look inside. Okay, now make a notice roll. Okay, here's what you see. Right? Or there I was like, you don't even need a notice roll. Here's what you see. But you have to actually walk up to it and look inside. You can't just say, I'm going to walk through the place and make a notice roll. You don't. It's not one notice roll. There's like 3 or 4 floors, and there are things that you might notice on all the different floors, and you're going to have to roll them individually, right? But so yeah, I mean, I make them describe what they're doing in a general sense, but I don't just say, if you don't roleplay, you auto fail. That's ridiculous. I just say, what are you doing, right? Here's one of the issues. A lot of players want to make their own rolls. And it seems to me one of the things that's going on in this game group is that he has allowed, or the players have taken the liberty to just say, I'm going to roll persuasion, right? You don't say that. You say what you're doing, and the GM says, here's what you roll. Okay? That's the correct way to play a role-playing game, unless you and your group sit down together in a session 0 and decide you want to do it a different way. Right? So like my play-by-post, we agreed that players would go ahead and role-play and then post their role, because since the play-by-post is asynchronous, right, and one of them lives in Finland, if she makes a post at 3 o'clock in the morning saying I'm going to look through the mansion, and then has to wait until I wake up and she's in bed to say make a roll, and then we got to wait till tomorrow night for her to make her roll, and then the next morning for me to tell her the results, that's silly. So that we have said you can go ahead and make your rolls, right? But at the table, no. And again, if it's agreed to, it's fine, but you have to agree to it. I don't need any of this. What is evasive maneuvers? I don't want any of these things. Resurgence. Is there another power pool I could take? Leadership. Ah. What does this one do? Plus defense. I mean, it's not much, but I could see her being a leader. Presence. Pacify and provoke. No. I think that's it, guys. I think we're going to take maneuvers. What's assault? Wait a minute. Plus damage. Huh. So do we want 3% extra defense? I think AoE, it includes me. Or do I want 10% extra damage? Huh. I'm not going to really be able to enhance these guys. 2% isn't much. 10% is a little better. I mean, I could enhance this up to about 3.5%. Been trying to buff my defenses, but doing more damage, you won't need the defenses as long. This is actually really hard for me to decide. I think I'm going to go ahead and take the maneuvers. And that will go up there, I guess. Where do I want to put? Let's put hasten down here. I think we'll do it that way. So let's turn it on. Keep an eye on our smashing defense. It's 8.28% now. It's now 10.9. So, alright, not too bad. Okay, guys, let's go meet with Indigo, and we'll look at the next one. If you don't pick up on cues for side quests, that's not my problem. Get over yourself. It's not a video game. It's a role-playing, pen and paper-based game with miniatures. I'm not holding your hand if you choose not to pursue things. I'm not sure about this one. Like, I'm not sure what the problem is, right? It sounds like he doesn't care if the players miss the side quests, and they're mad at him for not telling them you've missed a side quest. If that's the case, I'd say players grow up and look more carefully for side quests. On the other hand, if he's making up side quests and he's getting mad at them for not picking up on them, that's another story. Then make them more obvious. So I don't know about that one. Number 7. This is absurd. If you move to a square in combat, there's no takebacks. What? Now look, I can understand. And at one point, the new girl, who should have known better because she'd been playing in the Rome game for like 2 years, my best friend was jamming for a short while, and she disengaged. She was in melee from somebody. She disengaged, moved away, and he said, okay, this guy gets an opportunity attack on you. And she said, oh, I forgot about that. Can I do something else instead of that? And he said, actually, no. He said, like, he normally would have allowed it, but he said, you know what? No, because the villains have been, like, they were just rolling so bad. He couldn't roll over a 10. He said they've had such horrible luck for this whole battle. No, I'm not going to let you, like, retcon that. Right? So, I understand saying no retcons, but moving to a square and then changing your mind, I don't do that. I think that's, I don't know. I think that's silly, and I don't mind letting people say, wait a minute, I didn't realize that. Let me rethink. We like tactics and strategy in my group, and it sounds like this guy, and he might think he's doing tactics and strategy, but you're not when you do that. Number 8, you tell every single person what you're doing before you do it. You don't bleeping roll dice and then say you're casting Fireball. You tell us all. I don't agree with the phrasing, but I completely agree with that. You don't roll dice at all. You say what you want to do, and the GM says make an attack roll. You say what you want to do, and the GM says make a skill check. That is up to the GM. Right? You do not roll until the GM calls for a roll. I agree with that, but not his way of saying it. Number 9, I will give out exhaustion more frequently. If you argue, go home. Or you can actually fight me over it, or you can DM yourself. And I think he's talking about literally, let's have a fist fight over exhaustion. Why is he giving out exhaustion more? There are rules in the player's handbook and the Dungeon Master's Guide as to when exhaustion happens. Why aren't you following the rules? Now, if he said, we are going to strictly adhere to the rules on exhaustion because you guys have been ignoring those rules, I could see that. Right? But that doesn't sound like what's going on here. He sounds like he's going to purposely start giving out exhaustion just to make it harder. I'm not sure why he would need to do that. By the way, these guys are yellow because we leveled up after getting this mission. We actually got the map after we leveled up, but the mission came from Crimson before that. Number 10, and fight me, like actual fight me. What is wrong with this guy? Right? This is where somebody in the Reddit said this is a sign of someone who's been broken by his players. There's something wrong with him, and it feels like the players have just, as you go through this, you realize like the players must be doing a lot of stuff that's driving him crazy. Number 10 shows this. Every snide comment you make to an NPC will be remembered and paid back in triplicate. You all seem to believe there is no consequence. Right? So again, this seems like one of these groups of players who are doing OMG so random stuff. They don't think there are going to be any consequences. And so they just say and do whatever they want. They're constantly snarky and snide to the NPCs, which means they're not really role-playing their characters because the role-playing is what your character would do. And usually when players are being snide and snarky, it's what their player would do. Right? How did I know the informant was here? I didn't. I just have a sense of where these guys tend to hide or be hidden. So this sounds like they've been doing things without consequences for a long time. However, I did something with my players once in Champions where I had them get completely fooled. They just so followed up every clue without questioning it. They just let me lead them by the hand through every clue. And I got kind of annoyed at that. So these guys aren't doing any thinking at all. And so I tricked them, right? I had like a clue be actually a plant by the villains, and the villains actually tricked them into attacking essentially a shield base, like an until base, and then they got arrested, right? And then when I was sort of gleefully telling my best friend this, he wasn't playing during the year with us. He came back in the summer, and I was telling him this, and he said, "Well, wait a minute, Scrapper." He said, why would they, if you've been leading them by the nose for the last like 10 scenarios, how is it fair to then lead them by the nose and trick them. Like, why would you expect them to look beneath the surface of what's happening if they've never had to before, right? And it's this, and he was right. And I actually apologized to my players, and they were like, "Oh no, it's fine, it's fine. We had fun in that scenario." I'm like, "Okay," but it really was unfair of me to, on the 20th scenario, after 19 scenarios where I was basically leading them around and giving them obvious clues, and they just followed the obvious clue and they were successful, to all of a sudden give them this like Game of Thrones intrigue thing that they weren't ready for, right? It wasn't fair. And similarly with consequences, if players are ignoring consequences of their actions, such as ignoring the consequences of insulting NPCs, my guess would be that the GM hasn't given them any consequences before, right? So a proper way to word this might be, I've allowed you guys to get away with being snarky and not really doing role-playing and acting as yourself instead of the players with the NPCs up to now, but I don't like this, and from now on I'm going to enforce in-world consequences, so please be aware of that. That would be an okay way to word that. But it sounds to me like there haven't been consequences before, right? The fact that he's had to warn them that from now on, your NPC insults will be paid back as if it's the real world and there are consequences for your actions, implies that that has not been happening in his game so far, right? So, I mean, it sounds like both the players and the GM are at fault there. Number 11, you will not be given a mega dungeon every session. A temple isn't the size of a small city, and neither is a cave. This bleep will happen when it's natural and organic. Go play some roguelike computer game if you want that, that being the mega dungeon. I don't know where that comes from. My guess, so this sounds like an answer to a player complaint, right? That the players go into a temple and it's just like the temple floor, one map, one simple floor, and then maybe a little bit of a basement with 3 or 4 rooms. And they're like, "Oh, this dungeon is too small. We wanted a bigger dungeon." Right? And he's sitting there going, "Well, ecologically, in theme, in world, it doesn't make sense for the temple to be that big." Right? That's what they do in video games, right? Like this game. It doesn't make sense for this lab to be this big, but they make it that big because, they want you to grind through a big giant dungeon, right? I mean, just look through this lab. There are giant labs with giant rooms with hardly anybody in them. There's absolutely no way to divine the purpose of some of these rooms, right? Like, what is this? A blank, empty ledge. What is the purpose of this lab? No idea. It's just here to hold a spawn, right? And what he's saying is, I'm not making video game dungeons. I'm making realistic dungeons that are designed to make sense in the world. And so it sounds like the players, when he gives them short dungeons that make sense in the world, are complaining that it's not a big giant dungeon like a video game. I can see it. I don't. It sounds like they're complaining, and he's answering a complaint. Number 12, the travel portion of the campaign, I guess, is done. You want to travel continents, doing literally whatever you want, whenever you want. Go play World of Warcraft, or play with an AI DM. Again, this sounds like something that the players want, that the GM doesn't, right? So it sounds like they've been trying to traipse all. We want to go. Their characters are in the equivalent of California, right? Like, let's say we're playing Deadlands, and my players are in Los Angeles in California, and they say, right now we want to get on a train and go to New York, right? And they don't want to role play being on the train, and they don't want it to take a long time, and they just want to get there so they can do it. It sounds like maybe that's what these players are doing, and so he's telling them we're not doing that anymore. Again, this sounds like a situation where the players were doing stuff the GM wasn't cool with, and he's been putting up with it for a long time, and now he's saying, "I'm done." Right? Again, this is why the one person on Reddit said the GM sounds like a broken man, right? That the players have been doing all this stuff to him that he hates, and instead of stopping it early, right, saying, "I don't think we should do that, this doesn't make sense," he's been allowing it, and that's making the players walk all over him. And as a GM, it's really kind of your own fault if the players are walking all over you. Look, I mean, I did some of this with my best friend where I allowed him to make up his own character. And, like, if I then put out a notice, making up your own character is done. If you ask to make up your own character, I will fight you or I will go home, or something like that. That's a very non-constructive response to a problem I created by unwisely allowing him to make up his own character. Now, I couldn't see the future, didn't realize what was going to happen, and it's 2020 hindsight, right? I did say to him at one point, I never should, like, the worst decision I made in this entire campaign was letting you make up your own character class, right? Not make up his own character. Maybe I said it that way. His own character class. Of course, they make up their own characters, but making up his own class, a subclass, right? His own sorcerer. And I did it because he wanted to play sorcerers, but he was convinced that they were badly designed in 5th edition, right? And at one point he said to me, "I'm not just trying to make my character more powerful. I'm trying to correct sorcerers for D&D." And I'm like, "This isn't, for other characters for other sorcerers in the campaign." And then he said, "Well, I know there aren't going to be another sorcerer in the campaign." So he was trying to fix a thing that he thought was broken in D&D. And I said to him, "Look, my campaign isn't the place to do that." And as he said it, I think he typed it. He realized it, right? Yeah, we both made a mistake with that, I think, and I think he would probably acknowledge that. It happens. We're not flawless, but it's not entirely his fault, right? Because I was the one who allowed it. So you have to be careful when you're allowing stuff like traveling all over the continent, right? You can't necessarily get mad at the players for doing it when you keep allowing it, right? At least that's my feeling, right? Some of the responsibility for this bad player behavior really does rest with the GM if it's been going on so long as to trigger this explosion. Here we go. If you're late with no good reason, I'm going to have your character's hit points for the entire session. That's ridiculous. Like, look, we had people who were late all the time. My best friend was one of them. What did we do? We made backup characters and we played without them. We knew they hated us playing their characters, so that's what we did. It didn't make them come on time, right? But if they complained about the way we played their characters, we would say, then come on time. We didn't do anything to get their characters killed or anything, but we made the decisions for their characters. You don't want me to make your character's decisions show up on time. Now, this does place a burden on other people, right? Because somebody else has to play your dang character. And people may not want to do that. But, yeah, we tried other things, right? We tried doing things like docking XP for people coming late. Didn't really work. We tried giving bonus XP for people coming on time. The good Rob said we can't, like, if we do that, then what's going to happen is, what we tried to do is say whoever gets here first gets 2 bonus points, whoever gets here second gets 1 bonus point. And he said, yeah, that's going to result in people showing up 20 minutes early to your house when you're still trying to eat dinner, right? Because they want the XP. And so that never happened because we never really instituted that. We tried saying you get a bonus XP if you come within 15 minutes of, if it's 8 o'clock, you come by 8:15, we'll give you bonus XP. Didn't really work. People who were on time kept being on time. The people who were late kept being late. Didn't really work. Look, the reality is that somebody being late all the time is a courtesy issue. It really is. And you need to talk to that person about being more courteous, at least in my opinion, rather than, I'm going to use our little buffs here. Rather than using in-game stuff. Having hit points, that doesn't make any sense to me, right? It just makes it easier for you to kill the character, so now you're killing the character in revenge for the player being late. This you need to separate in-character and out-of-character stuff. Right? I mean, that's just... You shouldn't be using in-character punishments for out-of-character behavior. That's my feeling. And so, yeah, I'm not a fan of that. Right? If people aren't coming on time, you have a conversation with them. If they refuse to come on time, you say, okay, I'm not going to GM anymore. You don't fight them, you don't fist fight them, you don't throw a tantrum, and you don't make nasty posts. You just say, I'm not going to GM anymore, guys. When they say, why is it? Because people don't come on time. Either they'll change their behavior or they won't. Okay, let's target this guy. I'm going to multitask here and read the next one. Number 14, if you don't show up for no good reason, in other words, if you have no good reason for being absent, and that will be determined by me alone if no one else has the guts to say stuff for fear of upsetting one another, the first time you'll find yourself losing either a whole level or up to 3 major items. The second time you do it in a row, you'll be removed from the chat and the group, full stop. I have no bleeping time for people who do not show up. So again, this sounds like a group of players where the players just don't show up. And look, I know it's frustrating. In my, online group, we've had it happen a couple times where somebody just couldn't make it and they let us know like as we're all getting into the into the Discord and into the Foundry to get started. Sorry guys, I can't make it today. It's incredibly frustrating and we have to then decide, are we going to play anyway or not? It's extremely frustrating when this happens. Sometimes with my group, it's always they something outside their control, right? So like the one guy, his son actually ran away, right? So he was supposed to show up with us, and he said, "Guy, like 10:45, and yeah, we started at 11, I think at that point. 10:45, he's like, "Sorry guys, I have an emergency here at home with my kid. I can't." He didn't give us any details, right? He just said, I got an emergency. We said we hope everything's okay. I can't remember if we played without him or just canceled. Sometimes we do one, sometimes we do the other. But Sapper. So I put on Strength of Will when the Sapper shows up because that cannot be detoggled. Okay. Let's get these other buffs going. So he then came onto the Discord later that evening and said, "I'm sorry. What happened is my kid ran away from home." I don't think the kid got very far, right? But they just like discovered he was gone, and I don't know if there was a note of leaving, right, or whatever. I can't remember the whole story, but yeah, I think he ended up with a neighbor or something, and they, after a couple hours, they found him and brought him home. But yeah, he had to deal with that, right? That's a really serious thing. That is more important than a role-playing game, right? He had to take care of that. So obviously, in a situation like that, right, there's nothing you can do about it, and you have to understand that the person is, they're in a crisis right now. So, just checking for snipers, sappers. So, in any case, it sounds like this guy has been left high and dry by lots of players over a long period of time, and he's sick of it, right? Again, this is probably somebody who should not be GMing for this group, right? Because clearly the players are not being courteous to him. He's now not being courteous to the players, right? Yeah, you should show up to your sessions, but this is super aggressive. Here's another one that shows that this guy is with a dysfunctional group. If you get too stoned or drunk to play, that's number 15, I will go home without a warning. Your warning is here. I've never played a role-playing game with people who were inebriated or high or whatever. So I don't even know what that's like. Obviously, if it's causing a problem, it needs to stop. I mean, I would probably pack up and go home too if the rest of the group is. It sounds like it's not just one guy. It sounds like multiple people in the group are coming to the group to the game impaired or becoming impaired during this session. I don't know if they play it maybe a game. Maybe they play it like a game cafe and they serve drinks there or something. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, I agree with him. Don't come inebriated to a game session. But yeah, I would probably walk out too. But I wouldn't play with. I would not play the game with people who are inebriated during play. Like that wouldn't be enjoyable to me. So I just wouldn't do it. Now I'm not saying other people can't get drunk, and if they like it, and that's up to them. So we're maybe a third of our way through this. I think we're gonna read one more because it's relevant to the point we just made, number 16. If you get up for a hit or a smoke or whatever break, every 10 minutes I will simply pack up and going home. I am sick of waiting for every bloke to be at the table. Right? So this is what makes me think multiple of them are going out for smoke breaks or drink breaks or whatever, and it's I doubt any one person is going out for a smoke break every 10 minutes. But if you have a table of 4 or 5 people and they're all smoking and drinking and going out for breaks, and they're not coordinating it, every 10 minutes somebody's getting up from the table. Again, this sounds like a completely dysfunctional group, because even if you're all a bunch of chain smokers, you would think that you guys would say, okay, every hour we're going to go on the hour we're going to go out for 5 minute smoke break and we'll come back. This way you're only stopping once, right? It wouldn't be like I go out at 5 and you go out at 5:10 and John goes out at 5:20 and Sarah goes out at 5:30 and Smitty goes out at 5:40 and then I'm going out at 5:50 again. That's silly, right? That just seems again like a very dysfunctional group. Um, so yeah, it seems like this guy is gaming with a bunch of people who are incredibly selfish, rude, and discourteous. He has allowed a lot of this to go on for too long. He is way past the end of his rope, and he is lashing out. And so I think that's what's going on here. And I can understand some of it. And if you read these parts where you see what the players have obviously been doing, right? Not showing up, coming late, taking smoke breaks and disrupting the session, showing up inebriated, intoxicated, high, whatever. If they're doing all of those things, you can easily understand why he is so fed up, right? And that gives you some insight into why he was saying things like, you're going to auto fail persuasion checks if you do this. The NPCs are going to hate on you if you do that, right? Because you've got a bunch of um, mentally impaired, not like, I'm not talking about somebody who has a disability, but like cognitively impaired people who are impaired because of smoking, drinking, whatever, not smoking, but drinking, taking drugs, whatever, who are sitting around the table acting like drunkards, right? Fooling around, screwing around, not taking the game seriously, rolling whenever they feel like it, etc., etc. And that's not the way this guy wants to play D&D. He wants to play a real D&D session. Clearly, this GM is a misfit, a mismatch to this group of players. They'd probably be better off if one of the players who likes to fool around became the GM and just gave them an OMG so random campaign. They would probably like that better. And that DM would probably be better off to find another group of players. We're going to keep going with this probably the next 2 episodes. Maybe we'll do 16 per episode, 15, 16. So we'll try to get to like number 30 or so in the next episode, and we'll get to number 45 or so in the episode after that. Drop down comments below as to what you think about this. Yeah, if I were to put out rules, I wouldn't have 44 of them. I'd only have one. Be a grown-up. It would cover a lot of this stuff, but in a much more polite way, right? Just be a grown-up. Take turns. Wait for the GM to call for rolls. Showing up on time. Being courteous. Letting us know if you're going to be late. That's just being a grown-up, right? Act like an adult. And that solves like 99% of these problems. All right, folks. We're going to stop there. Off screen, I may do some crafting of sets. We still need sets on some of our powers. We're only going to put sets on the primaries. We're going to definitely want to get a defense in here. And then we need 1, 2, 3 more sets, right? These 3. And possibly, and we want to put a defense set in mind over body. So we need 4 more sets. So I'll see if I can do maybe 1 or 2 between now. Maybe I'll try to do 1 per episode. I don't know if we're going to have the money to do 4, depending on what's available, because we only have 30 million influence, and it could probably be up to 10 million to do one of the better sets. So I'm not sure if we're going to be able to do all 4. And I also want to save some cash on this character to ship it over to our Dominator, because the Dominator is going to be playing on the Praetorian side, so we want to make sure we're fully enhanced from the beginning with that character. There's only 1 level to go, guys. We're 1 beat in. We only have essentially 9 beads left of level 49. My guess would be by the time we finish this 44 rules for D&D over the next couple episodes, we're going to be pretty darn close to finishing this character. So if you haven't done so yet, drop down in the comments below ideas for what kind of Dominator powers you think I should have, and I'll consider. I don't know. I don't have a character concept yet. It's almost certainly going to be male because this character's female, and I like to alternate. You wouldn't know it from watching my Let's Plays because some of my ideas just ended up being female, but I think the Dominator is going to be male. So if that help, I don't know if that's going to help. Really shouldn't matter for powers, but sometimes like a concept just strikes me as a female character or strikes me as a male character for whatever reason. Um, so, like Nightmare Last was going to be a male, and then when I decided to do demon summoning, because Nina, my group leader, was a demon summoner, and I thought her pets were really cool, and I liked the whole thing, and I started thinking about what powers, and she was going to have a whip and everything, and I just thought of her as almost like this demon dominatrix. I'm like, hey, okay, that sounds like a female character, and it became Nightmare Last. Um, because that was going to be a male character originally. So yeah, this is probably going to be a male character, not 100%, but like I'm 80, 90% sure it's going to be a male character. Not sure. I'm kind of leaning toward dark because dark is pretty cool, but I've done dark melee before, so I don't really know. I'm not sure what I would pair it with. Illusion sounds pretty cool, so not really sure. So, but I also was thinking about either fire or ice. So if you've got a concept, like a character concept, that goes with the special effects, that's great. If you just say, hey, these powers work really well together, that's fine. Not plant, thorn. I'm not doing plant or thorn because I've done that before. All right, folks. It's been a long episode, so hopefully the next two will be shorter. Until next time, I am Scrapperlock, and this has been City of Heroes.